It's intangible. So, last night in Carson, California at the StubHub Center, or Dignity Health Sports Park, or Home Depot Arena or Center, whatever. The tennis venue at, obviously, just outside of the LA Galaxy Stadium was the home of the WBC 140-pound consolidation that obviously takes place at the behest of Josh Taylor stripping. The fight was initially set to take place between Jose Zepeda and Jose Ramirez. Ramirez, his behavior has been kind of, in terms of what his desires really are, we don't really know, but he decided to pull out. Supposedly it's been rumored he wants to make a move up to 147, which, in my view would be kind of overdue due to the fact that he's appeared to struggle to make the weight. His shoes have been filled by Regis Prograis, the former WBA champion at 140 pounds, and the former World Boxing Super Series final contestant against Josh Taylor. This was really his first big fight since that Taylor fight, which was obviously a classic fight, tremendously competitive, and one could even argue he was unlucky to not get the decision, obviously in Scotland. Fighting against Jose Zepeda, who himself has been a recipient of bad luck. The Terry Flanagan fight, him blowing out his shoulder after 2 rounds in a fight that, in hindsight, he very likely would have probably emerged victorious in. He obviously fought Jose Ramirez for the WBC title. Ramirez coming off of his victory against Antonio Orozco for the vacant WBC title. And Zepeda basically gave him the fight of his life. I mean, was a very close fight. He dominated the first half of the fight, but he eventually wore down, trying to stop and, basically trying to counteract Ramirez's pressure. It eventually started to take its toll, and Ramirez worked his way into the fight. Ramirez did an excellent job absorbing his left hands and coming back into the fight. However, many would argue that Zepeda's pot-shotting, his straight left hand, the effectiveness of the shot, and his overall more clean work possibly should have earned him the decision. Very close either way, though. Zepeda would go on to fight against Jose Pedraza later on that year and pick up one of his signature victories to further establish himself in contention, as the victory itself also has aged fairly well considering the work Pedraza has been able to achieve in the coming years afterwards. And then obviously Zepeda would fight against Ivan Baranchyk. It was one of the best fights I think anybody's ever seen. They exchanged like 8 or 9 knockdowns in 4 rounds, and Zepeda ended up winning the fight. Baranchyk obviously would never be the same since then. His punch resistance has effectively depleted. Baranchyk would eventually lose to, an 140-pound fringe contender in Montana Love. But Zepeda was able to, graduate past that level. He would look poor in his next fight against Hank Lundy, and he even looked poor in the fight between the Zepeda fight and the Baranchyk fight against Castaneda, but he would eventually score a first-round knockout and somehow an upset on the bookies against Josue Vargas, an up-and-coming prospect who stylistically had attributes that had given, Zepeda issues in the past. Southpaw, mobile, things of that nature. But his chin is made of reinforced cesium. He couldn't take Zepeda's first left hand. Was put down on the canvas brutally. Was already, tremoring, and he suffered a brutal stoppage defeat. Zepeda would go on a layoff, waiting for the WBC to order a consolidation after Josh Taylor was stripped of the belt. It would eventually be settled upon him fighting Regis Prograis. Prograis, after the Taylor fight, his career, unlike Zepeda's, had stagnated. He would go on to fight Juan Heraldez a year later. Afterwards, he would fight against Ivan Redkach, and then I'm not sure he had a fight in between then, but he would have a fight against the WBC. I think some type of like minor WBC title holder, and a reasonably well-regarded domestic level fighter, and Tyrone McKenna. McKenna since then has actually picked up a decent little upset victory, I think, against Chris Jenkins, and before then was able to defeat Jose Felix, but belonged nowhere near at Regis Prograis level. Nowhere near world level, and Regis basically used him as target practice for about 6 rounds until he eventually stopped him. Or I think McKenna's quarter pulled him out. Overall, I thought Regis looked sharp in that fight, and he looked good enough to where I made him a pretty comfortable favorite to beat Zepeda. I was initially thinking points, but then I started to lean late stoppage. Zepeda himself, before the fight, had been struggling to make the division. One might argue that Regis himself had also been struggling, but Regis, I think, showed a little bit of a lack of discipline after the Taylor fight, and clearly had enough fat, to be able to cut, in order to make the division. And in the case of Zepeda, he was just flat out struggling to make the weight to begin with. I thought eventually it would possibly take its toll and he'd get broken down and stopped late. That's kind of what happened. Zepeda did some very good work in the first, 2-3 rounds. His right jab was very good. He was able to walk Regis down. He was able to force Regis sort of out of mid-range and use his superior, dimensions to keep Regis at bay. He wasn't really using his left hand much early on. Regis was defensively responsible, but he was able to work the body. Regis eventually made the adjustment of dropping his guard, relying on his upper body movement to try to nullify Zepeda's punches. He was using it well, taking the steam off of his shots and taking the momentum away from especially Zepeda's left hand, which really didn't take effect to any significant degree until the late rounds. Regis worked his way into the fight. His up jab, which Zepeda had struggled with in the past, was just far, far too accurate. He was landing it eventually with regularity. His body work in the early rounds took its toll, and Zepeda eventually became very circumspect in the mid-rounds. In fact, the commentators were complaining that he wasn't aggressive enough. Well, if you think Zepeda's, a pressure fighter, he's fought much differently to the way he fought in this fight, you'd be sadly mistaken. His style is very one-dimensional. He is a counter-puncher. He's a pure counter-puncher. He's, to an extent, even, kind of one-handed. Zepeda has never been one to engage fighters on the inside. He was at a big disadvantage, and it was basically limited to a clinch, his, ability to try to nullify whatever Regis was doing up close. And Regis was too physical for him as well. And the left hand eventually started to make Zepeda even scared to, pull throw the straight left hand, as he himself was fighting with a low lead hand and was susceptible to the shot. Regis was also spin off, take foot positioning. He would land, a wide looping left hand over the top. He was eventually starting to take effect with his, right hook, but mainly just, jabs to the body, left hands over the top, and the occasional follow-up, right jab to follow up his left. Zepeda really didn't have any answers for it in the mid-rounds. He was landing shots, but nothing significant enough, and Regis' ability to close the distance and take the fight to mid-range prevented Zepeda from getting the type of power into his left hand that I think, he typically would like to. He gets power in his left hand when he's on the back foot and when he can shift his weight. When he's unable to do that, his left hand is far less powerful. On the front foot, his punches had virtually little to no effect. And Regis just picked him off, really, for the most part, and got physical down the stretch. But Zepeda did show heart, down the stretch of the fight. In the 9th round, he had a pretty good round. Was able to momentarily buzz Regis, actually, in the closing moments of the round. I didn't really catch it at first, but eventually I saw him pretty relentlessly trying to lure Zepeda into the clinch. And then in the 10th round, he rocked Regis with a straight left hand early. Regis himself, though, would immediately come back. Regis showed phenomenal ring smarts in this fight. Whenever Zepeda would hurt him at long range, he would immediately close the distance to smother, and he would immediately throw back. He showed a great poker face. And in the 10th round, that exemplified hit. He got hurt with a left hand over the top from Zepeda. But immediately, Regis came back and hurt Zepeda with a left to the solar plexus and forced him to kind of fold up. And he would pretty much take over the 2 minutes pretty much in succession for the round. But then Zepeda started to come back and land big in the last 30 seconds. The 10th round was quite close. I gave Regis the round when you take into account the fact that he was able to also hurt Zepeda, but also he was more active, landing hard shots to the body and outworking Zepeda, and was overall controlling the round from, the standpoint of range. But in the 11th round, Regis caught Zepeda coming in with a short little right hook, had him on wobbly legs, and then eventually threw a combination, and in basically very similar fashion to how Jose Ramirez finished Maurice Hooker, he was able to just punish him on the ropes. Zepeda eventually fell down against the ropes, and the referee stepped in to stop the fight. I suppose the referee could have counted him, but I think in the end he made the right decision to stop the fight. Regis moves to, I think, 28 wins and 1 loss. I can't remember exactly the amount of knockouts he has, but yeah. Regis's career has been stalled over previous years due to the fact that he's basically he's gone to more obscure, promotional outfits. He'd been a free agent after the Josh Taylor fight. He fought on PBC card against Juan Heraldez, and then he eventually fought on a Triller card, and then he eventually decided to sign with Promellum. Logically, I didn't really see what he was really trying to achieve, trying to go to those promotional outfits. I suppose he wanted to maintain some type of individuality in terms of his say in his career. Maybe he felt as though him not being backed by a major promotional outfit would prevent sort of a conflict of interest in terms of working with other companies. But I think he has to realize himself that he's not a major draw, especially in comparison to even someone like a Jose Ramirez or even someone like Teofimo Lopez, who's eventually going to move into the division. There's not going to be as much incentive for them to fight him, so even though there won't be a huge promotional conflict of interest, and I think Probellum will be willing to put him in big fights, I don't think other companies will be willing to risk it. And with the fact that really neither the PBC or Top Rank have a complete stronghold over the division. The PBC does have 2 of the belts, but Top Rank will probably look to acquire the WBO belt that they already have in the form of Josh Taylor, and if they're able to force a Teofimo Lopez versus Liam Paro consolidation, Regis kind of will be stuck between a rock and a hard place, but hopefully for him he's able to get a big fight, or maybe get some type of management group contract expiration at some point. I don't know. We'll see. If Teofimo is going to be fighting Sandor Martin in a couple of weeks on December the 10th on, the Heisman weekend, which is a weekend that Top Rank seems to want to reserve for him. That's a risky fight, I think, but I think Teofimo, if he shows up focused, composed, he should be able to get through it. His physical attributes, I might talk about that fight in a little bit, but I think he should be able to get past Martin. But if he's able to, if Top Rank decides to put him in with Regis Prograis at their own peril, I think that'll meet for Teofimo's doom. Regis, I think, with the fact that Josh Taylor seems to be so stubborn on attempting to make the weight, I think he's probably the man to beat in the division. He's gonna, like I said, he's gonna struggle to get big fights, but someone like an Alberto Puello is just, or even a Gary Antoine Russell, I think Regis is counterpunching his aggression even against an Alberto Puello, and also his ability in the pocket, which defensively at least far supersedes Batir Akhmedov's. I think he wouldn't have too much issue defeating an Alberto Puello. The length would maybe give him issues, but I think he'd be able to close the distance eventually. Subriel Matias, I know a lot of people like him. He's a fan favorite in terms of his style. He's reminiscent of a Margarito. He hits extremely hard with both hands, even with, arm punches. He's very naturally heavy-handed, very exciting. I think Regis hits too hard for him. I think he's too mobile, and I think he'd walk him onto a lot of left hands and probably eventually force a late stoppage against the Matias. Teofimo Lopez, if he meets him by way of a mandatory or through unification, I think he would frustrate Teofimo and outbox him. Teofimo is someone who, I don't know if I've made my thoughts very clear on him in the past, really since the Loma fight. Teofimo is someone who has an exceptional amount of talent. He's very reminiscent of a Zab Judah. Not really in terms of style. He does fight differently. He's not as fluid in terms of as a combination puncher or really with his feet. But his explosive power punching really affords him a chance against almost everybody he fights. His size, his technique even with his punches. He's definitely a threat, but the fact that he really doesn't have very high ring intelligence. He makes a lot of bad decisions in terms of game planning. He's not a particularly skilled pressure fighter either. And the fact that he can be mentally got to, I think would cost him dearly against Regis, who himself is both going to apply pressure, utilize a lot of head movement, and use the jab and apply a lot of lateral movement that Teofimo would need a lot of mental concentration and focus to be able to nullify himself. And Teofimo is someone who's mentally rather fragile, not in terms of he lacks fortitude and the ability to persevere through tough situations in regards to his determination, but because of the fact that he's extremely overly emotional, and he doesn't really have any type of voice in the corner that can be able to guide him or give him tactical advice, through those tough, moments. I think Regis would frustrate him. And I think he'd get pretty comprehensively outboxed. I don't know about stopped, but I think Regis would probably deliver a pretty comfortable ass whooping. I think Regis is the man to beat in the division. Not a perfect fighter. He does get hit, and his defense is largely reflex based, but very, very, very good. Complete fighter, a guy who can fight at all ranges. Good head movement, can block parry shots. Good power, great punch variety. Regis is a hell of a fighter. The only thing missing in his career has been management and maybe the luck of the draw against Josh Taylor. So you all, take care and have a good one.